arrest that has been portrayed of the 33-year-old Collins Jumaisi Khalusha is a stark contrast to the very quiet, reserved, shy and friendly man they have known for some 2 years. They have also seen him entertain a string of women in his one-roomed house. And this is a story that we will be looking deeper into on pages 6 and 7. Still on the top page, I see implosion in Azimio over Ruto dialogue. And this is on pages 10 and 11. Azimio Chief Raila Odinga's ODM party yesterday gave the clearest indication yet that it is ready to go it alone in a political deal with President William Ruto and his Kenya Kwanza side after Wiper leader Kalonzo Musyoka was ejected from Mr. Odinga's city offices as he read resolutions of a parliamentary group meeting. And still on the top page, I see why Ruto has put Mudavadi in charge of all the ministries. I see when he fired his CS on July 11th, President Ruto said that some of the functions they performed will be executed by the principal secretaries. It has, however, emerged that certain functions can only be executed by a CS. And this is just opening our eyes to the gap that is there now. And this is a story on page 8. And on the property DN2, interestingly, I see the title Learning from Gen Zs. We'll be getting into that and seeing what is being reported. I see Stop the Madness. It's time for a reset. And I see here the recent wave of Gen Z protests has spotlighted the legitimate concerns and voices of our youth who are advocating for meaningful change and recognition. These protests, however, have dents of violence against Kenyans, including journalists. The cases of the abduction of Macharia Gaitho on Wednesday. We have the shooting of Media Max broadcast journalist Catherine Wanjeri wa Karaoke in Nakuru on Tuesday, and the police water cannon spraying of CNN photojournalist Fabian Muhire as he went about his work in Nairobi's Central Business District stand out as polls. More on the same, these acts of targeting journalists are unacceptable and must be unequivocally condemned. I see peaceful demonstrations and protests are a form of free speech protected by our constitution. They are a vital mechanism through which citizens, particularly our youth, can voice their frustrations and also demand for a better future. Journalists play an indispensable role in covering these protests, ensuring that the public remains informed and that the grievances of the protesters reach the relevant authorities and stakeholders. This is a very, very detailed commentary, geared towards a reset, and it is continued on pages 13. And just us now getting in, and let me look at what is being reported on page 2. I see second batch of 200 Kenyan police officers land in Haiti. Kenya is the lead country in the mission meant to restore order and stability in the Caribbean nation. Well, quite a lot happening out there, even as we continue to grapple in our own country. But I see here on the same that on July 7th, Kenya police officers began receiving equipment to be used in Haiti, and the officers received armored personnel carriers through a facilitation provided by the United States of America. Page 2. And page 3, Kenyan-owned U.S. eatery ordered to pay 68 million shillings for wages tips theft. Swahili Village founder Kevin Onyona has agreed to out-of-court settlement with DC Attorney General Brian Schwalb. And look at this story on page 3 of the Daily Nation. And moving on, a story that we touched on 4. I see this was no mistaken identity, journalist says, of his abduction. Gaitho had driven into a police station after he noticed he was being trailed when he was abducted. He adds that when I asked them to identify themselves, the answer was that they had a Subaru and that I should know that they were policemen and that they had guns. So veteran journalist Macharia Gaitho, who was abducted yesterday by police after he drove into a police station fearing that he was being trailed, has rejected claims by the National Police Service that his was a case of mistaken identity. That's a story that is on pages 4. I see here the Veteran Nation columnist says the ordeal was unbearable for his children and his mother, who is 95. Look at that story on page 4. And I see here page 5, State House at pains to prove claims on sponsors of protest. Ruto has accused the Ford Foundation of instigating the demos. And State House spokesperson Hussein Mohammed here saying you will see some action very, very soon. And of course, the government is yet to substantiate President William Ruto's statement accusing the Ford Foundation of sponsoring protests in Kenya, even as more demonstrations rocked at least 24 counties a day after the head of state's warning. And this is a story on page 5. You can look into it. And moving on to page 6, Quarryman was a shy lover boy. On that story, I see here that the detectives paid attention to the bed, beddings, and the mattress, dusting the items for possible evidence, including DNA traces. They also dusted the curtains and screened the walls using magnifying glasses for possible traces of blood or DNA material that could help unravel the killings. And I see here for a room that would essentially have been a slaughterhouse, there was no smell of blood as the investigators would have expected. But the house was damp when the first team of officers went in at 5:30 a.m., still feeding the doubts that are there already about could this just be a plan or a plot to distract the people from what is actually the truth. And I see here Miss Ann Mutua, who is a neighbor, and I have seen him with several women in his house. When he first came here, he was married, but after a while, we heard that the wife had run away. So this is a story that has been well elaborated. That is on page 6 and 7, and I see pain and tears as families identify bodies of the victims. And I see here, barely 3 months ago, Roslina Koth Ogongo packed her bags, bid her mother and 3 children goodbye, and left Assemble with one mission to win the rat race that is life in Nairobi. And the story continues. And I see the age of Roslina Koth Ogongo, whose body was among those recovered from Kware. Her body was identified by her mother. So we will still continue to follow through with that story. And I believe that at the end of it all, justice will be served. And let's go to page 8, why Ruto put Mudavadi in charge of all the ministries. I see here just more on the same, that politically the retention of Mr. Mudavadi appears to signal the growing political importance of the former ANC party leader with Kenya Kwanza fold. A story on page 8. And of course, I did mention to you about the DN2 talking about learning from Gen Zs. Urban dwellers can borrow from this generation's use of technology to advocate for their right to basic amenities and also decent housing. Very, very interesting. And you can look at that story. That is on page 18. Residents can leverage technology to analyze and report on the goings on of in their neighborhoods as an alternative to using crowdsourced data. And look at that story on pages 18 and 19 of the DN2. Let's go to the back page here. More education. I see teachers' welfare to take a hit in Ruto austerity plans. Treasury maintains budget cuts are only temporary as state awaits a supplementary budget. And look at that story that is on the back page. And moving in to the sports page here, I see page 31. Third time lucky, Ejore feels this will be her year. After 2 failed national trials, US-based psychology graduate eager to fight for Kenya. Paris Olympics marketing blitz powered by female athletes. We just have 8 days to go. And page 30, Alan Bell's ring over Go's poor form as Champions League action looms. But new Brazilian coach Neiva calls for patience as he prepares team and gets familiar with them. That is a story on pages 30. And maybe now we can have a look at the Standard and see what is being reported. And I see here the very first story is a missing opposition. In slumber, the opposition leaders seem to have been caught off guard in the renewed clamor for change, unlike in yesteryears when they gave direction on matters politics. They have this time round left the struggle to the youth. The leaders cannot agree on a common path. They claw at each other instead of checking the government. Have they lost what is actually their mandate? That's the question. Professor Gitile Naituli, who is the university don here, saying, I think the opposition made the right choice not to jump into the protest early, and that allowed the protesters to identify the problems they want addressed as soon as possible. And still on the top page is media defiant in face of police brutality and impunity. And that is just a story on, what we have touched on as well on the Daily Nation about the abduction prosecution. And I see this is on pages 3. And what is at stake in Paris Medal Chase? That's a story on page 32. And just more on the same, let us see what the Standard is saying about Macharia Gaido, who was abducted. It is extremely traumatizing to be abducted by unknown people. I have the right to know if they are policemen, even criminals do have guns. And I see here a statement, Oduor echoed Kananu's sentiments, emphasizing that he cannot buy the narrative which he termed as a fallacy. Journalists were targeted to scare us from reporting. We will announce and choose a day to call for nationwide protest. Enough is enough, he said, adding that we will continue to do our job. And of course, the beat is still ongoing and we will still continue to follow up. I see the journalists hit out at the government for violence meted on reporters covering protests. And they want action taken on individuals who abducted Macharia Gaido and officers who shot Catherine Wanjiru, a story that we did cover just yesterday. And I see here, page 2, court orders PAG Kenya to lift ban on women seeking top seats. For 26 years, women could not vie the church's 3 top positions. But Justice Jacqueline Kamau ruled that the rules are unconstitutional, and now women can vie for the lucrative post of General Superintendent, General Secretary, and General Treasurer within the Pentecostal Assemblies of God, PAG Kenya Church. A court has now ruled. And we have a very interesting editorial here on pages 14. Act on Gen Z demands and stop harassment of journalists. The recent wave of Gen Z protests has spotlighted legitimate concerns of our youth who are advocating for meaningful change in our country, Kenya. These protests, however, have also been marred by alarming incidents of violence. A story continued on page 14. And of course, the Standard has also highlighted Mudavadi, the new one-man cabinet. The same is President Ruto says the move was necessary to embed operational enhancements. The head of state dismissed the cabinet on July 11th. Just a reminder on the same. And page 8, women rape traders robbed as demos turn ugly in Kakamega. So this has actually gotten to a very, very bad level. I see Alisa Cheng, who is a rape victim here, saying, I tried shouting, but the screams were drowned by the noise the rioters were making. When my neighbors saw what was happening, they raised an alarm and alerted the police, who came to my rescue, which is a whole different turn. And, you know, we did have an interview on Monday, and we, talked about the difference between the protesters and rioters, because that's not the same thing. We have protesters who are actually, seeking justice. They're seeking changes. They're seeking that, the nation that we live in is actually going to be bearable. I mean, there's just been so much happening, and they have every right to fight for what is theirs. But then we have rioters who have come in and distracted the whole thing. We're having women being raped in Kakamega, which is really, really bad. So even as protesters are coming out, we need to be careful. Who is your neighbor? Who is the person who is next to you? Is it a protester or is it just a rioter? Because some of them now have infiltrated these spaces and are taking advantage of the situation. And now we see that actually police came to the rescue of this lady. A woman says she was gang raped by 9 men who broke into her house. Can you imagine? Bakery lost bread to looters who forced their way into the premises. So we have a lot of, confusion and things that are coming in, and it's really, 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 really unfortunate. And this is a story on page 8. And let me just conclude with the Business Daily here. The top page here: supermarkets, warehouses beat homes in rental returns. Retail industrial developers enjoy 9.5% yields. Slow price growth keeps residential incomes relatively low. And on the back page of the Business Daily, CBK should issue rules on ethical use of AI in credit scoring. And now to the last word. And Peter Drucker here is giving us the last word, who is an Austrian-American management consultant, educator, and also author, saying, what gets measured gets improved. Beautiful, beautiful quote right there. So we've come to the end of our newspaper review segment. You can, send in any comments, opinions that you may have, any concerns that you would love to share, and I would be glad to actually look through them and read. So right about now, let us now look at the video of the day.